Atul, if you're okay with it, I'm going to get started. So clearly, I'm between you and lunch. That much I've figured out. So this is always an interesting slot to take. And I'm a products guy, so unlike the prior 2 sessions, which are both fascinating, this is going to be something different. This is going to be more about a real-world practical use case of how you can use data to solve some specific problems. I think one of the things that I was gleaning from the prior 2 conversations was effectively, when you talk about data, when you talk about analytics, when you talk about machine learning, deep learning, all of these are buzzwords. If you can apply technologies to solve real problems, that's when value gets created. And so I work for a company called Akamai currently, but I've been working with data for some time now. And what I thought is I'll share some of what we do from the context of security, which is a real problem today, and I'll tell you why it's a problem that you should care about. And then I'll give you a sense of what we do in terms of using the data that we have access to solve security problems and security challenges in a very specific way, which hopefully will give you some sense of why the data that you as entrepreneurs, you as product leaders create, capture, generate is extraordinarily valuable. So just show of hands, how many of you know Akamai or what Akamai does? All right, so some of you do. For those of you who don't, Akamai started as a content delivery network. The idea was you created a distributed network through which you basically cache content on behalf of your customers and then deliver it out to the edge. And it was all about offload. It was all about making things faster for our customers. And today we are a multinational company spread out across about 130 different countries. We do about $2.5 billion in revenue annually. But the roots were content delivery. It wasn't security. And then somewhere along the way, we had this passion as a company that the internet really needs to be not just reliable and fast, but it needs to be secure because of the kinds of things we started seeing happening on the internet. And that led us to question, is there anything that we have access to that we can use to bring security to the internet? And that was the genesis of this statement that you see back here, that we are all about making the internet fast, reliable, and secure. So the data. Well, let me give you some sense of the actual data. We have a pretty massive network, about 240,000 servers worldwide, distributed in about 1,600 different networks. We have about 3,700 locations where these servers are based in about 650 cities, 130 countries, so very, very, very massive spread. And you look at the scale of this distributed network, and it's about 40 million hits per second that we serve on our global platform. It's a pretty challenging technological problem for those of you who are from a computer science or engineering background. You know that a massively scalable distributed network of this scale, it's a sort of a shared nothing architecture. How do you make that work well at scale is a pretty interesting challenge. But what this also lets us do when we are serving out all this content on behalf of our customers is it gives us amazing insight into about 1.3 billion clients that are trying to access content and access information, access websites across the world on a daily basis. We capture 7.5 petabytes of data every day just in our logs. We put it in about a 300 petabyte queryable store. These are large numbers, right? And we do this every day, and we process this information, and it gives us some valuable insight into what's going on the internet. So every day, depending upon whether there are big events happening or not, Akamai carries about 20 to 30% of all internet traffic on our network. That's a lot of data. But we never thought that data would be valuable until we started really thinking about what can we do with this information? How can we use it to serve this mission statement that we have of making the internet truly amazing? Now, why should you care about all of this? You guys are all entrepreneurs trying to really create the next generation of products, solutions, services that are going to solve big problems in India. Awesome. I mean, India is really just an amazing place, a dynamic place for innovation. You know, the last couple of companies that I've worked with, we've always had big development centers here, and it's just been fascinating to see the way in which the IT industry has evolved here. I grew up in Mumbai, before it was called Mumbai, so still refer to it as Bombay. And you know, it's like since when I left the country and now, it's just an amazing sea change. So it's great to come back and see this. And in the last 10 years, I mean, this was a stat that I saw, the overall traffic on networks has grown by about 5x. Now, what this does not show is the fact that voice traffic has grown by about 40% in that time frame, and data has grown by about 1,600%. So 16x in the last 10 years. Awesome. Businesses that you are creating today are leveraging the internet in fascinating ways. That's the good news. This is great. What's the bad news? The fact that you're creating all this value is also making India an extraordinarily interesting place for attackers to do bad things. Web attacks are happening everywhere. This is just a screenshot that I captured from the data that we have for one day. Actually, it wasn't even a full 24 hours. That just showed the attacks that we were seeing on our network against different customers whose sites we accelerate and secure on one day. And as you can see, attacks happen everywhere. You guys can all identify where India is there. There are big attacks happening even in India on any given day. And who are these people? So I have a laminated picture of this ransom note. For those of you who are Dutch speakers, just kidding, I know none of you, this is in Dutch. But one of our Dutch customers got this ransomware note. What was interesting was the people who were threatening them did not send them an anonymous email routed through multiple proxies, because I guess they knew that the internet is often not secure. So they sent them a actual letter in snail mail, in postal mail, that had cutouts from different newspapers that basically says, you know, if you don't pay us X amount of Bitcoin, we are going to DOS your site. That's what's happening every day. It's not happened to you yet. You're at different stages in your company, in your maturity, in your growth, in the value that you have created. But this is what's happening every day across the globe with different companies. There are people who look at your success and say, I want some of that. I haven't earned it, but I want some of it. And here's how I'm going to get it. So what do you do about that? Well, first you need to understand the kinds of attacks and the kinds of bad behavior that we see. So the most primitive form of attack that we see on the internet was denial of service, brute force. I'm just going to send so much unnecessary, nonsensical traffic to your site that it's going to bring your servers down. And what's interesting is when we see the patterns of what kinds of attacks are happening, how many attacks happen on a regular basis, on average, when somebody gets attacked, this is just on our network what we've observed, this is real data, as much as 30 attacks. So it's not that somebody will attack you and then give up. They'll attack you, say, okay, you withstood it, I'm going to ramp it up, I'm going to try something different, I'm going to increase the scale. And they keep hitting you over and over and over again, because they want to see if they can bring you down, because then they can extort money from you. So these are real problems. The largest attacks that we have seen of late, just in this period of time, this is less than 6 months. In these less than 6 months, we saw in that last period in October, 3 attacks over 300 gigs. And over this period from 14 through 16, over a 2-year period, multiple attacks over 500 gigs. There aren't too many data centers that will be able to withstand something like this. Your systems, your infrastructure will be down before you know it. Your ISPs will start failing. Your telcos will have problems handling this. Because the problem with the internet, most people don't realize it, there's a lot of capacity on the edge. If you think in terms of the bandwidth that you get into your house, the bandwidth that you get to your phones, the bandwidth that you get to your businesses, it's extraordinary. But then you look at the backbones, the major telcos, and how they connect to each other, and the bandwidth they have in their backbone pipes, it's about 50x less than the bandwidth that's on the edge. So it's very easy to choke the backbone. Mathematically, that's how it works. And so you have to think in terms of how do you defend yourselves when your attackers are coming in a very distributed way against you. And what's happening now is people are getting smart. I mean, the last conversation was interesting because there was a discussion of IoT. And nobody brought up IoT and security as one of the concerns about the true adoption of IoT. So let me tell you a story about this botnet called WireX that was detected about, I think it was a month and a half ago or 2 months ago. Basically, this botnet infected a whole bunch of Android applications. And through these Android applications that you and I using on our phones, without knowing that your phones were launching attacks without you having any clue that that's what was happening, these Android apps were launching small-scale attacks, each device doing a few requests, malicious requests. When aggregated, was becoming a massive flood, and it was all directed against hospitality companies. And even we, with all that data that I told you about earlier, didn't have all the intelligence. We ended up having to collaborate with Google, basically showed them where the issues were, and then working with them, they cleaned out all the malicious apps from their Android stores. This is a great story of collaboration between large internet companies to really take advantage of the data that we have between us to keep the internet secure. But the bottom line was, there is so much compute capacity out there today that if you want to take it over and launch an attack, you have some amazing power at your fingertips. So for those of you who have kids, I have 3 young kids, and I've used baby monitors. Those baby monitors, like the new ones, are all connected to the internet because you want to be able to see, you're at work, you want to see your baby sleeping at home, like you log in, and how many of you changed the password on your baby monitor once you got it? I bet you, if there were a few of you, you were all in the security space. Because otherwise, you would not be paranoid enough to ever change it. Guess what? There were baby monitor companies, these manufacturers had not figured out that they really need to have a unique, different password for every device. So they had a common password. So I just go to the store, buy one baby monitor, I see the password. I've got the password for all of your baby monitors. I can hack into every single one. That's how these IoT devices were being taken over and used for launching big attacks. The big Mirai attack was 1,500 different devices. Baby monitors, video cameras that were on traffic lights, all kinds of random devices that you would never think about. So this is a real problem. Then you think about something more sophisticated. Web application firewall attacks, where you look at more complicated things like SQL injection, where you try and insert something into a web form through which you take over somebody's site or data. Well, let me tell you the good news and the bad news. The good news is India's really arrived, because the bad news is, of all targeted countries, India was number 8. So there's enough value being created here in India by the applications that you're building that you really are in the bullseye. You're not as big as, we're not there yet with the US and the UK yet. But we are getting up there. I mean, something to be proud of that, there's a lot of value being created here. Something to be worried about that, people have figured it out. There are attacks being launched. What is even more interesting is where the attacks are coming from. So I looked at the data on where are the attacks emerging for all the attacks that we see against companies and targets in India. A huge amount of them is coming from within India. So you got to think about how do you protect yourself from near regions, near IP addresses, from IP addresses that are far away. And this shows what verticals were being targeted. Across the board, I bet many of you here represent, you're coming up with products, businesses, ideas in retail and hospitality and financial services. Your industry is right there in the bullseye. On the left, it shows all the various types of attacks that we typically see in this kind of category of web application layer 7 attacks. And then the worst thing that can happen to you is if somebody uses this to get in and take your customer's data, that is brand damaging. You will never live it up or live it down if you are the CIO or the CISO or the CDO of one of those major organizations that were represented in the earlier panel and your data gets breached. Not only will you lose your job, your CEO will most likely lose their job. That's just a reality. And how many of these news articles have we seen recently? Like in the US, there was a big one, the big financial services company. 143, if I have the number right, individuals had their credit information stolen. Ridiculous numbers. That's completely the death knell. So you've got to make sure that you think about how do you prevent somebody from taking over accounts on your website, on your web applications. If you're not thinking about security, you're probably not doing this right. So protection becomes really important. So what we started doing was we started saying, okay, let's see what data we have. So all that data, just because we are in the request stream, we are between your end consumer and you, we said, okay, let's see all those requests that we capture, the DNS requests, the web traffic that we see. Let's get third-party data. Let's get registrar data. Let's marry it all together, put it in this big cloud-based infrastructure, this 300 petabyte queryable store, and from it, it's not enough to talk about machine learning and use machine learning algorithms. You've also got to realize that human intelligence, even now, is what's driving the algorithms and what we are creating in terms of machine learning. So human intelligence is as important, if not more important, than machine intelligence. And you've got to bring all of that together. And that's what we do. And we maintain it in a model where we basically do things like scoring IP addresses. When we see all this behavior happening on the internet, client IP addresses coming in, we say, are they doing bad things? If they're doing bad things, keep in mind that IP addresses are dynamically allocated, so you've got to age how long you give somebody a bad score. But if that person with the bad score tries to come to your site, you need to respond to it, you need to stop it, you need to protect that website from that particular IP address. You got to think in terms of the reputation score for that IP address across different types of domains, across different types of targets. So that data lets you do all these kinds of really, really interesting nuanced things. And then we can do a much better job of protecting against DDoS. We can do things like, if we see an attack against a particular target coming from 100,000 different sources that all look like small legitimate traffic, but added together is massive, well, we can actually filter for that now. Because we are recognizing these patterns from the algorithms that we have created from this massive pool of data. Web application firewall threats, we can do a better job of detecting new patterns just because of all of this data that we've captured. Sometimes it's not the pattern, but the IP address that alerts us to the fact that something bad is about to happen. And then we can protect, ATO stands for account takeover. We can protect somebody from trying to steal somebody's account. And in most cases, this happens by using bots. Now we talk about bots, chat bots are good, Google bot is great. You never want to stop Google's bot. That's what gives you your search engine score, your site rankings. But there are bad bots. There are bad bots that try to scrape information from your website. There are bad bots that try and take over account information or accounts on your site. How do you distinguish between a good bot and a bad bot? So you know what we did? We started looking at the interactions on the web page. mouse movements. And when you see the mouse movement and the way you navigate on a particular page, it is very different from how a bot navigates on a particular page. Because we as humans are very organic. That is very organic. You cannot write an algorithm to fake that much randomness, or that it's not really random, it's kind of, semi-random. If you're scripting a bot to try and look like a human and try and take over a site, you're either going to be very precise, perfect lines. You ever tried drawing a line with a pencil on a paper? Ever get it perfectly straight? No, you can't. Too many micro variations. But bots can be perfect, easy. But sometimes they try and be very smart by being extremely random. Well, you're never random either. And we also do things like looking at keyboard clicks. It's a QWERTY keyboard, right? If Q and W are really close to each other, you can type between those two keys very quickly. But if you have to go across the keyboard, it takes you some more time. So looking at the time between key presses, you can tell whether it's a human or a bot. Now, all of that data is available. You can capture every single bit of that data through JavaScript. It's having the foresight that using that data, you can do something really interesting and create learning algorithms that basically help you detect a bot from a human. And what's the next stage of evolution on this? Trying to detect one human from another. So if my young son, who loves to play video games on iTunes, ever discovers my password, which he's done at least thrice by now, and tries to buy something in my name, can I detect that it's not me making the purchase, but it's him? Same ID, same application, same phone even, but the way he navigates on that application is different from the way I navigate on that application. These little micro clues, can we use that to now tell, Atul from me if he ever chooses to use my phone to do something on my app? That's the future. It's really an interesting exercise, thought exercise. If you think about what data are you capturing, what data do you have access to, and how can you use it? I personally am highly, highly motivated about security. You might be motivated about something else. But think about it and think about how you can really do something differentiated, create value. This business 5 years ago was about $1 million to $2 million for us. Today, we do about $500 million a year in security. And it came from this small little idea that data has value. How do you apply it to a very specific problem? How do you try and figure out what do you have that's very differentiated? And the sky's the limit. So thank you for listening. Hope this was useful, and have fun out there.